Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Missing Movies panel this afternoon. Before we begin, before I do some brief introductions, we have a little bit of a sizzle reel to give you a sense of what Missing Movies is all about. Okay.
I think I've spent my life trying to find both identities. The country of my birth and my adopted country, the United States of America.
I do not know where any piece of my life really belongs.
What I leave behind has a life of its own. I've said this about poetry. I've said it about children. Well, in a sense, I'm saying it about the very artifact of who I have been.
We just showed a lot.
Okay, Missing Movies started 4 years ago, I guess, when a number of directors, Mira Nair, Nancy, Mary Harron, John Sayles, realized that some of their films can't be found, their rights are missing, and they don't know where any of it is. And they started to say, let's have a Directors Guild of America Zoom conference, this was during COVID, to discuss what we found and the serious nature of this business. And from that came Missing Movies, which is dedicated to the helping filmmakers and rights holders regain their rights, find their materials, and make their films accessible. It's 2 years old officially. We're in our second year. And we're just finding our legs, but we accomplished an awful lot in a short time. I can say that.
What would you say, I know each film can have its own problems, but what are some of the common threads that run through these different films? Why do they fall out of accessibility?
Well, I think, missing or confused rights situations, people who, a lot of companies, as you'll hear, specific examples, a lot of companies don't know that they own the rights to the films they own. And so that is a huge problem. Many times we have to actually prove to them that they actually own them so that we can get them. Which sounds illogical, but those are the facts. Then the other factor is materials that are missing. Sometimes ancillary rights, so music rights, that's a really big one. Not all rights were cleared, or they were only cleared for certain situations. John Sayles had a movie called Baby It's You that was missing for many, many years because the producers never cleared home video rights, because the movie was made just at that turn when home video rights were coming, when the home video revolution was happening. So a lot of times there's a big rights issue. I think those are the common things.
Dennis?
Oh, the only other one I would add is distributor indifference. Which is a major one too, is that these companies, and they have 5,000, 6,000 titles, and they just don't see a number of films worth bringing out. And some of these are fairly major titles that we have come through. Dirt by the Savoca gay team is definitely the one that we're focusing on.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them around that it's just too many films, and they don't see they see the finances, not the cultural fabric that needs to be woven around these films.
Amy, just focusing on Milestone for a second, you guys have restored and brought back so many films. Are there, aside from the films that we'll talk about shortly, are there any other really memorable ones, kind of even before Missing Movies started, that would serve as kind of a good case study for this issue?
Well, one of the projects that we took on was all the films of the New York woman filmmaker Shirley Clark. She made really bold and beautiful films, but they were not available at the time that we started. The other thing I wanted to just say about films that are missing is some films never get distribution when they first come out. And very often those are films that are the most likely to be unavailable. So there are films that are more likely to be made by people of color, by women, by queer people. And so those are important voices. So we have to look for the films that we know can't find right now, that we're already familiar with, but we also have to look for the films that we don't know. So it's a challenge, but it also makes it even more important. At least to me, it makes it more important.
So I'm sure many of you were here yesterday. We watched a documentary, kind of behind the scenes look at Household Saints, and then we saw Household Saints last night, and it's such a good example of a film that, it was a really popular independent film when it came out in the early 90s, and then gradually we all, in different ways, started to realize, wait a second, this film's not available. Nancy, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened with Household Saints?
Yes, Household Saints came out, was in theaters and popular in theaters, and then it transitioned to the home video market, which is probably one of the reasons, in hindsight, that we understand why it was made. We were content for home video, which was this new market that was coming in. So a lot of these sort of interesting, the golden age of the 90s films came because the industry needed to put out stuff. And so sometimes these very interesting movies that probably wouldn't get made otherwise got made. So we were out on VHS cassettes, and we were occasionally shown on television, like around Easter time, right? And then when the transition came to DVD, we didn't make that transition. And like a lot of other people, why? We don't know. No one calls you to tell you that it's happening. No one calls you to say much of anything. So as a filmmaker, we don't know, but we made assumptions, and we said, well, we're in good company. A lot of really good movies did not make the transition, and the only thing we thought is, well, we have 2 prints of our movie at the UCLA Film Archive. So it's sad that we're not on DVD. It's sad that we're watching our video cassettes selling for either $300 or 99 cents on eBay. It's sad, but we appreciated that a fan put it up on YouTube because they loved the movie. It's sad that it was a really lousy version with minutes missing and it just didn't look good. So just with these mixed feelings. But we knew we had these prints. And then you can help me with the story,
Well,
Rich.
yeah, I mean,
2018 or 17.
So Ira Deutschman, who actually was the person who greenlit the movie when he was at Fine Line, teaches at Columbia, and he wanted to screen it for a class. Now, the only options for anyone seeing this were VHS or 35 millimeter. So he called and asked if we had a print, and I said yes, very proudly, at the UCLA Film Archive. And so he called me back a week later and said he had spoken to UCLA, and that when they checked the prints, they were damaged. Damaged beyond repair. They couldn't be screened. There were multiple reels that were damaged. And so I made a phone call to the vault. Warner Brothers bought New Line, and New Line owned Fine Line, so I went to Warner Brothers, and I was told, we don't have the rights anymore, and we don't have the materials. And when I said, well, where are the materials? They said, I don't know, probably destroyed. So keep in mind now that that's, everything, all the pieces of creating that film were handed over to Fine Line, which, is Warner Brothers Vault. So now there really is nothing. There is a VHS cassette left. So Nancy, you can you can talk about that feeling.
Well, stunning, heartbreaking, devastating, depressing. That it's not like we could have made copies of, mag stock and film, and we did what legally we're supposed to do, which is hand over all the material to the company that financed and was going to distribute it. So at that point, we went back to Ira and said, nothing. We have nothing. And Ira called the head of Warner Brothers, Toby Emmerich. Look at how lucky we were. Okay, a lot of this stuff is luck and people that we knew that were able to make these calls. And Rich got a phone call a few days later, and it turns out it was the Vault again. This time it was the vice president of the Vault saying, we found 100 boxes for Household Saints. Where do you want them? And we said, not in our apartment. We don't have the room. But luckily, in the University of Michigan, they have my film archives. And so we called them, and they accepted 100 boxes and kept them safe for us until we had the opportunity to go and look, and where we discovered prints, the materials that we could use for an interpositive, and the CPK, which then was used for the documentary.
So that meant we had half of what was needed for you all to see the movie, because we had the materials, but we didn't have the rights. So again, luckily, the word luckily hits in about 5 or 6 times in this story, and it's actually a very happy ending, and it was a very short window of only about 6 years to actually get from there to here. So Maggie Renzi is sort of a pioneer in this. She's John Sayles' producer. She is working on getting all 17 of John's movies properly preserved and available. They had made a movie called The Secret of Roan Inish, which many of you might know. And that movie and Household Saints were the only movies that a company out of Denver called Jones Entertainment had put money into. And they were the sort of the final piece of the financing. It was, these movies are very, very hard. That's another characteristic of some of these really wonderful offbeat movies, is they're very hard to finance. So you need multiple partners. And we had 4 companies on Household Saints, and the last piece was Jones, and what they wanted was to own the copyright, because they were building a library, which is an interesting term we can talk about later, because for me a library is something where I can go and I can see things, or get them lent out. But the library in the film business is like a black hole. So fortunately, Maggie had gone through this process with Jones a couple of years earlier, and so she had a phone number. And when I reached out, there was no one left. The companies were dissolved. Mr. Jones had passed away. And finally, when I got to the estate lawyer who was trying to get this estate wrapped up, he literally said, when I described why I was calling, he said, "What? There's another one?" And I said, "Yeah, you had 2 movies." And that began a back and forth over a year and change, and we were, again, very lucky to be able to buy the film back. So Nancy and I now own it. And then the last piece, so that you can see it, are those 2 folks, Dennis and Amy, who made the whole restoration and the release possible. So that's you can't understate that, because otherwise I would have had all this material and I would have had a nice document that said we had the rights, but that there were no resources to get it available, to get it restored.
And I think the last thing I want to say is that one thing for us is this is a thrill, an honor, a dream come true to have this available. We have other movies that are in trouble. So we have to go case by case, one by one, and all the filmmakers that share this problem share it across a couple of movies.
One thing that's been so exciting this weekend and to spotlight missing movies is, to have a film like Annihilation of Fish, which it did have a big release, and lots of people got to see it. And then on the other spectrum, Charles Burnett's The Annihilation of Fish, which really, the public barely had a chance to see. And that presented challenges of its own. Dennis, Amy, Charles, who wants to? Okay, How It Got Lost, yes.
Excuse me. God, how can I begin? It sort of got lost because we had premiered the film early. In fact, the same day the World Trade Center plane flew into it, and that was after a Toronto showing, and we was quite surprised when we screened it there because we didn't expect anyone to show up that day, but they did. And we asked them why are you here? And they said because this event happened and they wanted to be with somebody, And it was 2 theaters that was full, and then that was the end of it. I think I don't think it had any other showing other than the Toronto Film Festival, and then that. And I don't know. I sort of lost track of it. What happened to it after that. But I understand that Dennis probably knows more. He does know more about it than I do. What happened to the film, because the guy who produced the film, which was a really wonderful person, Larry Dodge, and he was this wealthy person, and he went bankrupt and for some reasons and things like that. And so that was the end of that. It was sort of locked up in his estate and things like that, and he was being sued. So the film never got anywhere because of that until now. Since Dennis and Amy did this amazing job of getting the film back, and so now we have a chance for it to be screened at different theaters, hopefully. And tomorrow night. Tonight. Excuse me. Well, I'm glad someone is here that knows more about it than I do, because anyway. So that was my situation with that film.
And Dennis and Amy, you have a pretty significant history with Charles, and you did what was thought, I think, impossible for a while, to bring Killer of Sheep back to the world. I mean, just talk about all of your work with Charles.
No,
Well, yeah, we've had the great honor of working with Charles for a long time, 23 years maybe, something like that.
It was a long time.
It's been a long time. We are once again clearing the music rights to Killer of Sheep, because when we initially cleared it, we almost bankrupted ourselves, but we didn't. And it paid a lot of money to clear the music rights, and those were for 5 years, and now we have to do it again. So it's an interesting business, I have to say. But I mean, Killer of Sheep is one of the great masterpieces of American cinema. It's in the top 100 of the Sight and Sound most latest poll, and we will be able to later this year or early next. We'll have cleared the music rights and done a no 4K restoration. We also have represented Charles's short films and his second feature, the wonderful My Brother's Wedding, and we are completely thrilled that you're going to get to see the beautiful restoration, thanks to the Film Foundation, Hobson Lucas Family Trust, and UCLA, of Annihilation of Fish tonight. But the story of how Dennis spent 19 years finding the rights is worth hearing.
Okay, it's a very long story, and anybody who wants to read the entire long story can go on to milestonefilms.com, read more, open the Annihilation of Fish press kit, and read an amazing story of how it took 15 years. 15 years to make the film. Yes. And that was against all odds, thanks to Paul Heller and then finally Larry Dodge. May I mention its name?
Yes.
Yeah, 1999, it showed Toronto. Everybody loved it in the audience. And fucking Todd McCarthy wrote the most scathing, horrible interview. I hope you can use that in your documentary. Horrible review of a good, lovely, warm film. I mean, it was just totally merciless. There's personal reasons possibly for that. But the distributor said, I ain't distributing it now. Took about 8 years of, well, it happened in 2002 after the last screening. Charles said, can you look into Annihilation of Fish? And I said, James Earl Jones, Lynn Redgrave, Charles Burnett, and Margot Kidder. Let's not forget Margot. This is a good film for Milestone. We don't usually get James Earl Jones films at our door. And so I said, sure, let me try. And Larry Dodge, who was a very nice man, was nuts. And he wanted 50% of the gross, which any of you want to know is not a deal that is possible for any distributor or producer to take. And they kept going on and on. It took years. In 2000, I have files and files and documents and faxes, so I had to go back on all this because it started in 2002. 2008, his bank, American Sterling, got into trouble during the Great Crash, found out there was financial fraud. He went to jail, let's say 2012, died in 2015. I had the second person in command at the U.S. Treasury Department find out that the American Sterling Productions, which was not the American Sterling Bank, owned the rights. It now belonged to the state of California. It then took a year to find out the person to talk to. They were afraid, because Larry Dodge was still alive, that he would sue if they sold off the assets of American Sterling Productions. He died 2 years later. I went back to them. They said, we're not ready to. 2-3 years after that, I called up and they said, funny you should call, because we're just discussing it and what we're going to do with it. And I have never gone to bankruptcy court or known anything. But there was a wonderful woman named Nancy Sanders who was representing the state of California who said, I will walk you through it all. Martin Scorsese wrote a letter in favor of us. Charles wrote a letter of favor. Actually, I wrote it. You signed it. And we get to the day, and I'm really worried that somebody else is going to find out that because it's a public offering, a bankruptcy sale, that Criterion well, when it got to that day, nobody else had made an offer, and the black female judge is a big Charles Burnett fan. And so it's like, 19 years, I finally get a bit of luck. And we were able to purchase the rights to the film. That's the short story of it, believe it or not.
I should mention, as Dennis just, we put the press kit that Dennis just referred to on the event page for tonight's film. We put some background information about Household Saints on our website, and actually David Stenn, who we'll turn to in a second, we put his incredible Vanity Fair article on our website. So as Dennis said, that's a long press kit. They really go into the detail about Annihilation of Fish, so I invite you to check it out. David, you kind of described yourself as an outlier on this, but you're not at all. You do the same kind of work all the time. And maybe specifically, if you want to talk about, we showed the letter earlier today, which was a Hollywood studio film, but still found itself in La La Land, so to speak.
Yes, I will. I first, before I start, I would like to say, if you're an aspiring filmmaker or a filmmaker already, a documentarian, you're writing a nonfiction book, and you're licensing photos, all media in perpetuity throughout the universe. Tattoo it on your forearm, because that is what will save you, and that is what so often undoes a TV series. I've done episodes of 21 Jump Street, which I have seen on YouTube with like Lawrence Welk canned music. I did one that involved an acid house club, and the music was gone, and they're kind of like moving around because they didn't license in perpetuity for the songs. And like Richard mentioned, you can do a term license. Say no. Max out your credit cards, whatever you need to do, because that is what protects you from the underlying rights issue, which can be a huge issue. The letter, which was just shown, I found out that one print in the world survived of the letter at the Library of Congress in 2002. And I said, how long have you had this? And they said, since 1972. And I said, why hasn't it been preserved? And they said, it's incomplete. It's missing the Cobra Mongoose scene. And I said, Cobra Mongoose scene? Well, if you have seen the movie, you are aware that they cut to this Cobra Mongoose fight in the middle of it during the brothel scene. And so I started researching, and I looked at the contemporary reviews of the letter when it was originally released in 1929, and the Variety review said, it complained, it said the audiences were really annoyed by the fact that Paramount decided to take the UFA short, Killing the Killer, UFA is a German film studio, and insert it in the middle of the movie when that short had just played on Broadway a month earlier. So I went to the Library of Congress and said, do you have the UFA short, Killing the Killer? They said, oh, we've got 6 separate prints of that. I said, then you have the letter. You have what you need of the letter. So now you can restore it. Happy ending, right? Wrong. Because then they said, we don't know who owns the letter. Paramount says they don't own it. It's a Paramount film, but Paramount says they don't own it. So I researched that. Now, I'm doing this, I don't work for Paramount, I don't work for Warner Brothers, but if not me, then who, right? I mean, if not you, then who? So I found out that Warner Brothers owned it because when Bette Davis wanted to remake it, she had Jack Warner buy the rights from Paramount in order to remake it. And back then, which is unlike today, when they bought the remake rights, they bought the rights to the whole film. It was sort of like a non-compete. They didn't want 2 of the same titles competing, so they bought the rights to the original film as well. So I went to Warner Brothers with the documentation, and I said, you own this. And it's similar to what Richard said before. It's like, I come bearing gifts. Like, I'm about to give you a new corporate asset that you weren't aware of. And they said, well, we don't believe you. And I said, well, here's all the information from the US Copyright Office. You know, knock yourself out and get it again. So they did, and they said, you're right, we own it. And so they did a copy to protect, which is they took the material and they copied it to safety. So it technically was preserved, but it was not restored. So I felt like this is an extremely important film, and it needs to be restored. And I spent the next, 15 years trying to drum up the financing in order to get it properly restored. And the same, the Lucas Family Foundation, through the Film Foundation, funded that. But it just goes to show that, there are independent films that encounter this problem almost as an occupational hazard, but the older studio films, it can also be a problem. Porgy and Bess, produced by Sam Goldwyn, Dorothy Dandridge, you can't see that movie. So this can and does happen with all sorts of films, and it can be very confusing because there's a film I'm trying to find now, or missing one reel, and you can buy a $5 DVD of it really easily. It's in the public domain, but there are no film elements. And nobody wants to make a restoration from a DVD source, especially when you have an original camera and track nag for every single reel except the first one. So the hunt continues constantly, and these problems continue constantly because filmmakers want their movies at Sundance, for example. When my documentary Girl 27 went to Sundance, I had distribution offers, and the first person, it was like a dream come true because I never expected to get to Sundance in the first place. And they said, but David, we have to tell you there's a very big problem. So your heart sinks and your stomach sinks, and you think, well, I guess I have to ask what that problem is. So I say, what is that problem? Well, all these clips you use and all this music you use, you have to license that. And those are very hard to track down, and studios can be very difficult. And it was one of the great moments of my life because I pulled out a file and I handed it to him, and I said, all media in perpetuity throughout the universe. Because I had not taken festival licenses, because I thought if I just get festival licenses, they can hijack me. Netflix bought my documentary, and I felt like if I then go back to these studios and say, hey, I got distribution from Netflix, they would be like, okay, we want double, triple, and I couldn't afford it. And so I did that in advance, and I am, when I think I'm not smart, I remind myself of that. Because it is what saved me, and it can save your film too.
I mean, Rich, Amy, and Dennis, and Nancy especially have been doing a number of events and panels about, you know, the Missing Movies organization and what the mission is. Can you maybe, like, what are some of the surprises that you encounter when people start to learn about the issue?
Well, you know, first of all, what our mission is, really, we're working on 2 tracks right now. One of them is to help find films where we can, especially in the area of rights. And to that end, we are working on pulling together a pro bono legal service for filmmakers because tracking this stuff down can get really expensive. I mean, you're talking about the folks up here, you heard 19 years, 15 years. I mean, to actually, when you need that lawyer, when you hit that point where you actually need a lawyer, that can get super expensive. So trying to put together a program to offer pro bono legal help to filmmakers who qualify in the sense of income-wise. The other area that I'm really excited about is this. Hard copy, okay, media, physical media. It's a preservation guide for filmmakers. Any filmmaker out here should get a hold of one of these pamphlets because what we've done here is we tried to condense it, but when you finish your film, if you've done it properly, the way David is talking about, you have all of the stuff you need to preserve it exists, and it's all digital for the most part, unless you are shooting on film. But you have it, but it's not in one place. It's in different places. You know, how many filmmakers here actually have their actual audio stems? I didn't. Okay, I did shooting digitally for the last 23 years, and there are certain films that I didn't. It's like, audio stems. Where are they? I don't know. Who had them last? You know, so this provides a list of files. It gives you some information about how to back them up, the types of formats, and it's not a thumb drive. It's not even a hard drive. Okay. The rule of thumb in terms of drives and backups: if you have one, you have none. If you have 2, you have 1. Okay. So this gives you some core information on that, and some information about archives and the proper storage of those things. It also does talk a little bit about what filmmakers can try to do to get in their contracts up front. One of the things we're advocating for is that in your contracts there's I don't know if any of you have ever read those contracts or seen them, but there's a section for notifications. Well, we're proposing that the directors, the filmmakers, the director, the producer get notified when the copyright ownership changes and when where the materials are and when those materials are moved. Because so much time is spent just trying to find this stuff. So the 2 missions are helping filmmakers find their films and helping filmmakers out there, because right now films are being shot that won't be preserved. They won't be backed up. They'll in 10 years or less now, it'll be on a drive. You won't have the right cord. The OS has changed. The operating system on the computer has changed, and you go to plug it in, and it's not booting up, and all your work is lost. So get a hold of the guide. So that's really what we're doing. And people are shocked when we go around and they hear this.
I think also one of the things that we are saying a lot, that sounds kind of obvious but is not something that's ingrained in us, is to give your work value as a filmmaker. Whether it's your student films, whether it's the first film that you made that didn't win the festival, didn't get distribution, give yourself value and give that work value. You need to preserve that because in the future, someone is going to benefit from the work you did. Someone's going to be looking for something like what you did. And, we don't know that right now, but just give it value. And that's kind of revolutionary for me, as thinking even back to my student days. You were like, oh, it's an assignment. It's something to be preserved.
We were lucky enough to be able to preserve, and we're going to have on the DVD and Blu-ray for Household Saints, Nancy's student films, Renata, which is spectacular.
did not think.
Yeah,
about
and I
that.
mean, it's an amazing film. And we also have, Charles is one of Charles's earliest films, Several Friends. So, I mean, these are great films. The other thing I just want to say to further the idea about for filmmakers now is that you need to, if you can, if you're thinking about making a film, begin to think about putting some of these things into your timeline and your budget. Because we're not talking about a huge amount of money to allocate to make these proactive planning for your film, but it could make all the difference because although all films are fragile in some way, digital is much more fragile. You know, if a 35 millimeter print that's kept in a cool place can last 100 years or maybe 200 years. We don't know. It can last a long, long time. Even 35 prints that have not been kept in such good condition sometimes will survive very well. But digital files, as we all know, we have all lost files. You know, everybody in this room has had something where they went to find it and they couldn't find it. You don't want, and a film is so many files. You don't want to have that happen. So, so that's one of our goals. And the third goal that, although it's sort of tangential to the things we're saying, is we just wanted to really let people know this is an issue. And it's been interesting because one of the things is when we start talking about it, filmmakers go, whoa, I think I have a film I don't know where it is. And they haven't stopped to think about that because, again, like Nancy was saying, filmmakers think that things are being taken care of, and that's not always the case.
But also just as a culturally, as an independent filmmaker or any kind of filmmaker, when you sign that contract, you're immediately disempowered. So that's the other thing, is that you really feel like there's nothing you can do. But now we're learning there is something we can do.
And trying to connect the dots is another thing that we're doing. We have a tremendous advisory board. We have filmmakers, directors, producers, but we also have archivists. Dave is on our board. We have exhibitors and distributors and archivists.
Academics.
Academics, because, you know, for example, you heard about the Library of Congress, right? Well, people have asked me, well, certainly the Library of Congress has a copy of your film. Well, let's remember what happens. Some junior legal assistant in some major law firm is like, here, file this copyright for this movie. And it's like they just want the quickest way out. You know, now you upload files to the Library of Congress for your donation print. So what's the shortest amount of time that I can have to deal with this, right? So movies like Household Saints, we have a VHS copy at the Library of Congress. Movies like The Fabelmans, you may have heard of, an MP4 file, which is slightly about the equivalent, right, in terms of quality, maybe a little less, I don't know. And there's no connection. No one has told the law firm, hey, you know what, this is actually a preservation step. Like, how about giving them a higher resolution file, the Library of Congress, so that, you know, that's a pretty good bet that that's going to be around in 100 years, right? Maybe, we don't know. But, you know, so just trying to connect everybody, as Amy said, when you're in pre-production, how am I going to, what's the next step down the road to make sure this film is going to be available? I mean, we're putting all this money and all this work into it. So it'd be nice if 10 years from now, it doesn't disappear, you know.
Rich, can I go back to something you said? You used the phrase "for the filmmakers," that this work is for the filmmakers. Is that the outcome, that the filmmakers will own the films again, or is that not always the outcome?
No.
It will vary. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to vary. I mean,
Okay.
you know, as Dennis mentioned, distributor indifference, which I call hostage taking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes you're going to track those rights down, and the owner of the rights is going to say, you know, take a walk. I don't want to do it. You know, that's always possible. I mean, we are pursuing this film Dirt, which was made for Showtime. It's very possible we'll hit a completely, you know, dead end. It's not going to always be a happy ending. When you find out that, it's kind of like finding out the truth, right? It's not always a good thing that you find out, but at least we'll know.
And, you know, I have to say, what is available and what isn't available, as I think we've all experienced, is kind of an ambiguous category, right? It's streaming for a while, and then it's taken down, and then it's on another streamer, and then, you know, then it's not available. Oh, and it was on DVD, but that DVD is no longer available. You have to pay $99 or 99 cents. Or, so, I mean, it's not like we feel like we have like some, like we're going to eventually have like victory. We just want to keep working, you know? We want to keep trying to call attention to this, call attention to the importance to our culture and our history and, you know, our filmmaking culture. All of these things, it's important that a really wide variety of films and a lot of different voices are available. And if so, that's like, that's important in and of itself. And we hope that will eventually, in some way, in some fashion, be reflected in the kind of films that are made available. Because, you know, there is, you know, corporate ownership, you know, of a very few corporations own most of the streams that we have access to. So, you know, you know, can we make giant corporations do what we want? We'll try, you know?
And I want to say that also that this is going to be a continuing problem. This year, one of our board members, Jeffrey Fletcher, won an Academy Award for screenwriting. His first film is falling out of distribution in April. In next year, 2025, The Glass Shield, one of Charles's best films, is falling out of distribution, and the company that owns the rights say they don't know they own the rights. So this is going to keep continuing. This is going to keep going on, and this is why we have to educate not only filmmakers and the public, but also the studios and rights holders.
And let me add, for film fans, you know the feeling when you want to see this movie that was so important in your life that really affected you and or helped you through a time or whatever. We develop personal relationships with our movies, all of us do. And then you go looking for it, it's like, oh, not streaming. Real good? No, just watch. No, you know the feeling. So it's the feeling that a film fan gets. It's the feeling that we as filmmakers get because, you know, we feed off movies to make our next movie. We look back to the past to be inspired and to feed us and nurture us as we go off into to make a story for the future. I am so concerned about the film students that I have because I think about, you know, people bring me a project and I want to say, oh my gosh, you're doing a movie about blah, blah, blah. Wait a minute, there's like I want to give you a list of movies to see. And they're not available. So what are we feeding the future filmmakers? Like, we need the richness of our full history and, you know, certainly a lot more than we have now. We're not going to hit it all, but a lot more than we have now.
This impacts filmmakers.
I was going to tell you about my experience and what happened, which caused Dennis a lot of pain and suffering. And it was an attitude I had when I was going to UCLA. I never thought my films would be more than just what they were, like a thesis film. Once it was done, that was it. I didn't worry about getting the music, and that's where they came in and spent a lot of time and suffering because of my ignorance. And I didn't attend a seminar like this or this sort of a situation where they explained everything. When I made my first film, it was a thesis film, and I thought once it was done, that was it because there was no place to show it, you know, and it was this attitude like, and it was like films of people of color didn't do anything, you know. So when the film was finished, when I got my thesis, I thought, well, that was it. Okay. So I didn't have to worry about trying to get permits for anything, you know, because, you know, why pay all that money? And I didn't have to because if it was going to show commercial, then I would have to have documents and paper to show that I had the music rights and things like that. And I remember shooting at the Greyhound bus station. You know, I just went in with a camera with a eclair, just start shooting. You know, they told me to get out. You know, I just kept on shooting. You know, so now, I mean, my son goes to a school, and I was telling him just go and shoot this and do this. And he said, no, I have to have a permit. I have to have it signed. You know, I said, no, we didn't worry about that. You know, just go and do it. You know, because the film didn't cost very much. And that was a mistake because, well, it wasn't a mistake. That was the attitude we had. A bunch of people of color were making films. Never, you know, if we made industrial films, there was some sort of market or something like that. But in terms of, you know, films, pieces like Killer Sheep and other features, you know, we didn't have any place to take them. So why go through all this other, extra, running around trying to get permits for the music and stuff? If I'd have known I was going to sell the film, or could sell it, it would have been cheaper to try to get the permits for licensing the music then than waiting years later, to try to do that. And so, and it cost me, but if I had the attitude that, oh, I can sell this, and I need this to sell it, I would have done all that stuff. But I didn't know that, but now, believe me, I'm gonna get a permit for everything, I'm gonna go and just find, I know now that, in order to sell it, even try to get into festivals, you have to have evidence that you have permits for everything, train tracks, whatever it is, you shouldn't train tracks. You need a permit. I'm saying, no, just go and, I'm telling, young filmmakers, just go and take it, which was the wrong thing to do, Now I have to say, no, you get a permit, if you want to be successful and get your film sold at some point, get them in festivals, then you need to get all this business taken care of. And Dennis and Amy and those guys spent money and years trying to get the rights to music. I should have just, I could have got it cheaper then, but I didn't, So you have to know that this is a business, so.
I should interject too. We're, for the most part, just talking about American films. And as our other guest, I think he's here, Abu Bakar Sanogo, this is true for films all over the world from many different eras. And Abu Bakar was talking earlier today about on Thursday about some of the films that we've been showing over the weekend and the legal challenges that they faced and the restoration challenges they faced. So, this is a problem all over the world. So.
I just want to say also another aspect of having films unavailable is that if you're an actor, cinematographer, editor, composer, director, producer, if you have anything to do with a film and you're going to try to make, get cast, work in another film, and you want to say, well, you could see my work in this film and that film is unavailable, all the great work you did doesn't help your career because it's no longer there. And this does happen to a lot of actors and makeup artists and stunt
And the people on the other side that are doing the interviewing, without realizing, are placing a lesser value on your work because there must be a reason why it's not available. It's probably, it's not valuable enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, we do that. We do that without thinking. So that's another reason to amplify this problem on a big level, because then you start saying like, oh, how many people of color made movies? How many black people were making movies at such and such an era? How many queer people were making movies such and such an era? And then there's a lot more than you realize, History books don't have it.
Like a year and a half ago, Pam Grier was here. We wanted to show Fort Apache, The Bronx, Paul Newman, Pam Grier. You cannot get that film. It's one of those is it the HBO trio? Is that what they call? There's or Time Life. There's 3 films that I don't know. Okay. But yeah, just like big films that just kind of fall through. We're getting close to the end of our panel. Does anyone have any final?
Any questions?
Well, I thought we're gonna have a reception and people can come up and ask you all questions. We have time for a couple. How's that? Yes.
I got a chance to see your film that was showing how you made the film, Household Saints, and I just wanted to know about your experience of just being with that again, and the new layers of learning that you might have taken just because you got back into that film to make this new documentary of the film. And it was just wonderful. I just loved it. But when you said honor your work, well, going back into it like that is a real honoring of that work. But it also gives you more. It gives you must give you more, because it was such a rich story that you told about the making of it. And I was just curious about your own.
Thank you. Well, my daughter Martina directed the film, And I think she found in this material the story of how it was made and how difficult it was made and how, you know, improbable was that it was made. And then by losing it, in my mind, the film lost value, and I believed that it had less value. Okay, so that is what I think what we're talking about here is that, and what you were talking about, Charles, I think when you're saying, you know, we didn't know to get the rights to music and all that. We didn't, if you are not seeing yourself as a filmmaker on a grand level, if the geniuses all look similar, it's very easy for us to think that our films have less value. So I think that's a really important part about preservation, and that's why I'm very concerned always that, you know, gosh, we can't help every movie that's out there, but I just worry that even in the choosing what movies we help, I don't want to give value to one movie more than another. I will never presume to know the value of a filmmaker. And it's just, it's really tricky and difficult. So all we want, the most important thing I think of the work we do is, you know, put the information out there so you can do it. Like everybody's got to pull here. We all have to pull. I don't think we're like saviors saving movies at all. It's really giving you information so that you're aware that this stuff is going to happen.
Rich, Dave, last thoughts?
Well, the only thing I'm going to say is that please take one of these flyers. Don't recycle it. Find a young filmmaker and give it to them, or leave it in a cafe, or leave it where someone will find it, because there's really valuable information in there about the act. This is the practical guide to what Charles and Nancy were talking about in terms of valuing your work. How do you do that? And this is a starting point for it.
And if you can't get a, you know, hard copy,
it's on our website.
missingmovies.org, Film Preservation Guide for Filmmakers. It's there. Same thing is up there.
I wanted to also plug, because people always ask during this weekend, what can I do to help with, film preservation in general. Missing Movies is a nonprofit. I'm sure there's a button on your website to donate money, but also the Film Foundation, who supports so many restorations, UCLA Film and Television Archive, the Eastman House, on and on. If you want to help this cause, there are many ways to do that. So.
And interact with any groups that you're drawn to, whether it's Letterboxd or whatever, and keep the conversation going. Because you all know, we all have this feeling that we're missing these movies that are gone and we're being erased. So, get on and put it out there, look at a list of missing movies and add movies to it, take them off if you think they've been preserved already. Help us. This is such a big, there's no way we're going to do this by ourselves.
And if you want to help places that show these preservations, there's a button on the Wexner Center's website. So
I was going to say, besides financial issues, just keep your eyes and your ears open. Last month, a lost Clairvaux film from 1923 was found in a parking lot in Omaha. It can happen. It does happen. There was someone who had driven there from Kansas and bought for $20 a stack of film cans without understanding what the contents were. It was the hottest day in Omaha history, and these film cans are sitting there. And I got a call saying, would you be interested in The Pill Pounder, which is the title? And I said, yes, but it's lost, and it's been lost for 100 years. And they said, no, I have it. So if you see film, don't assume that it exists somewhere else. Just if you know your grandmother has films in the attic, there's the stories are unbelievable. It's now a legendary story, which is there was a lost silent film with Lon Chaney called The Unknown. And it was one of the most bemoaned, bereaved, lost films because it was considered a masterpiece at the time. Everyone was looking for it. Nobody could find it. One day, someone in an archive looked at a bunch of cans that said unknown. Opened it up, and they weren't unknown. It was the unknown. So miracles can and do happen. One happened last month, and they continue to happen.
that anecdote is actually in the wonderful documentary film, The Living Record of Our Memory, which you can get at the Kino website. A number of the people on this stage are in that, so I highly recommend that. We have a reception in the lobby from 6 to 7. Hope you can stick around from that. And then, of course, at 7 o'clock, the world premiere of the restoration of Charles Burnett's The Annihilation of Fish. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, or thanking our panelists.